Shalom from the holy city of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Today, the 23rd day of the month of Shevat of the year 5778, corresponding to the 8th of February of the year 2018. And today we shall be continuing, God willing, with our studies in the prophet Hosea, chapter 5. And we will have a general discussion today about the biblical prohibitions relating to the consumption of blood, and we shall put this into the chassidic and the mystical context by looking at a discourse of Rabbi Nosson of Breslov, speaking about the deeper significance of the prohibitions of both blood and the prohibited fats of animals in relation to the place of blood and the chelev fats in the Holy Temple. So with that, let us now, God willing, turn to our study of Hosea the prophet in chapter 5. Shalom, today, the 23rd day of the month of Shevat of the year 5778, corresponding to the 8th of February of the year 2018. And today we turn to the chapter 5 of the prophet Hosea, which continues with his critique of the sins of the children of Israel, both of the 10 tribes and also of Judah, which are what was leading to the terrible catastrophe that was to engulf these tribes, and particularly the tribe of the 10 tribes, the tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel. In the generation of Hosea, it was starting, and it was to continue, and the final and complete exile of the 10 tribes took place in the early years of the reign of King Hezekiah, in about the 6th year of Hezekiah. And in our previous chapter, chapter 4, we had started this discourse, and now in chapter 5, the prophet tells the priests and the leaders of the people, and particularly the royal household of the northern kingdom, to attend to the message of the previous chapter. Chapter 5, verse 1 of Hosea in the Hebrew. Shimu zois hakohanim v'hakeshivu beis Yisroel uveis hamelech hahazinu ki lochem hamishpot kifah heyisem lemitzpo v'reshes peruso Ale tovor. Shim'u zois, hear this. This, as Rashi points out in his commentary, this being the discourse of the previous chapter, which had come to an end at the end of chapter 4, verse 19, with the parasha Petucha. Our parasha is a new parasha Petucha, which continues on until the end of verse 7, and then we break into a new parasha Setuma, a closed parasha, which continues on without a break, despite the printed English Bible's break at the end of chapter 5, verse 16. The actual continuing parasha continues on into chapter 6 and to the end of chapter 6. So that is all one continuous section starting from verse 8 of our chapter through to the end of chapter 6. And it's very important to follow the original Hebrew scribes' divisions of the Tanakh into the parashas, which sometimes make a lot more sense than do the chapter breaks in the later Latin and English printed Bibles. So the opening challenge of verse 1 of chapter 5, Shimu zois, hear all of this, HaKohanim, you the priests, who are supposed to be the teachers of the people. You are the ones who must lead the people out of this present insanity and teach the people. V'hakeshivu beis Yisrael, hakeshivu, another expression for listening and pay attention, you the house of Israel. Uveis hamelech ha'azinu, particularly the house of the king. Ki lochem amishpot, this trial and this judgment is all relating to you, primarily the royal house. We see that it was the royal house of the northern kingdom that from the beginning had led the people into the rebellion, when the people already wanted to rebel from the kingship of the house of David under Solomon's son Rechavam, because Rechavam wanted to follow a line that was too strict in his government, whatever strictness was involved, be it in terms of actual political power or in terms of religious stringency. So the 10 tribes had wanted to rebel, but Jeroboam, was the one who feared that they would go back to the kingship of Judah unless he would build these, set up these idolatrous statues to rival the temple in Jerusalem. And this is what we are hearing in the continuation of our verse elusively, Ki pach hayisim lemitzpah. You were a snare to mitzpah. Reshes peruso al tovor, you were a net spread out over Mount Tabor. And the reference here is to, as brought out by Rashi in his comment on verse 1 of our chapter, where Rashi tells us, Mishpat ha-yisurim alechem, the judgment of suffering is upon you, the house of the king of Israel. Rashi specifying we're not talking about the house of Judah here, but of Israel. You were the snare and the net over these locations. It says Rashi, Al Shnei Horim Halolu, on these two mountains, Hoishivu Pardesiois, they set up contingents of guards, Lishmor Shelo Yalu Yisrael L'Regel Beis HaMikdash, to guard and ensure that Israel would not go up for the pilgrim festivals to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And our rabbis state, this is in Midrash and in the Talmud, that there were actually heavily armed guards with heavy metal chains which they would use to break the legs of anybody who would dare to try to go up to Jerusalem. This was a real a police state in its enforcement of the idolatry, and this is the opening criticism that if the people were lazy in wanting to have a more relaxed style of government, it was the royal house of the northern kingdom, starting with Jeroboam and continuing with these guards almost through to the very near the end of the house of the northern kingdom. They bore the responsibility. It was the leadership that bore the responsibility. And now, continuing in the Hebrew text with verse 2, V'shahato seitim ha'amiku va'ani musor lechulam. Shachato, Rashi tells us, bears its natural meaning of the way that an animal is slaughtered is that the animal's neck is extended and the knife is drawn across the throat of the neck of the animal. And they themselves are described as the seitim, people have gone astray. Miku shachato, these seitim, these people that have gone astray, they have made the traps that they have spread out very deep. V'ani musor lechulam, says the prophet, I the prophet, in the name of God, I'm coming to give reproof and to chastise to all of them. That is to say, to all of the different parties to this moral decline, each according to their deserts. And as we shall see that Judah is not spared the castigation of the prophet. Verse 3, Ani yodati Ephraim, veYisrael lo nichad mimeni, ki ato his niso Ephraim, nitemo Yisrael. Ani yodati Ephraim, God in the mouth of the prophet says, I know intimately and deeply what is this Ephraim, the leader of those 10 tribes. V'Yisrael, the remaining 10 tribes who went after the tribe of Ephraim, lo nichad mimene, they are not hidden and concealed from my attention. Ki ato his neso Ephraim, you now, You have gone astray, you have fornicated, O Ephraim. Nitmo Yisrael, as a result, all Israel have been defiled. It was in fact Ephraim that started with the idols, which the pollution of which extended to all of the people. Lo yitnu ma'al eleihem, lo shuv el Eloheihem, ki ruach zenunim bekirbaham, v'yez Adonai Eloho yodohu. It is their deeds that will not permit them to return to their God, their true God, for the spirit of lecherousness and immorality is within them, and they do not know Hashem, they do not know God. That is to say that when people's sins begin, they start with contrition and realization that they've done wrong. But as a person continuously sins, the evil and the force of the prohibition of the sin becomes hidden from the person. The very deeds prevent the person anymore returning to God. And as a result, verse 5, Ve'onno go'on Yisrael befonav, וישראל ואפרים יכושלו בעוונם, כושל גם יהודה עמם. The honor in verse 5 is an expression here with the connotation of something that brought down and humbled. So the pride of Israel prophetically will be humbled in their very faces. Israel and Ephraim will stumble in their sins. Koshal gam Yehuda imom, and Judah also has stumbled with them. Here is one of the very fascinating and deeply mysterious facts of that period of the rebellion of the tribes of Israel against the house of Judah, that while it took place in the reign of Rehavam, it was only a couple of generations later that the kings of Judah were intermarrying with the house of Achav. For example, King Asa and his son King Yoshaphat. Yoshaphat was married to into the house of Achav, and we see that indeed the house of David was led astray until there arose Atalia, who practically tried to wipe out the seed of David, which was only miraculously saved. And there was throughout the period, as we see depicted in Book of Kings, the later Book of Kings 1 and Book of Kings 2, there was a constant to and fro in the relationship between Judah and Ephraim, and Judah was by no means exempt from the sins. We see that there was a spread into Judah of the worship of the other gods from the time of King Solomon onwards, and in later reigns of kings there were the high places and the idolatrous cults and temples that developed. So Judah is very much in this as well, as the prophet now continues. Verse 6, B'tzaynam u'bivakaram yelchu levakesh es Adonai v'lo yimitzahu cholat mehem. They would go with their sheep and their cattle to entreat God in a display of outward religiosity, as if more sacrifices of animals could pacify and conciliate God, but they will not attain this, they will not find him. Cholatz mehem, he's disappeared, he's got stripped off away from them, they can't find him. Verse 7. באדוני בוגדו, כיוונים זורים יולדו, עתו יאכלם חוידש אס חלקיהם. So they have betrayed the Lord, for they have given birth to strange children, that is to say, alien children through intermarriage and through favoring women that were not faithful to the tradition. And now the new moon will consume their share, the new moon being an allusion to the month of Av, the fifth month, the month in which the spies gave their evil report about the land, and a month associated traditionally with the afflictions that were sent by God to chastise the people. So here is the end of the first parasha that makes up chapter 5, and at the end of verse 7 there is the samach, indicating that in the parchment handwritten text of Hosea there is a parasha stuma, a break here, less complete than would be the case with a parasha petucha. But now in verses 8 onwards, the prophet moves into calling the people now to rally for the actual troubles that are going to be set them from the nations that will be coming to drive them out of the land. Verse 8. Tikuhu shofar bagiv'o, chatzotzero boramo, horiu beis oven, acharecho binyamin. Blast the shofar in Giv'ah, and sound the trumpet in Ramah, and stir the alarm in the house of Aven, the house of iniquity. Aharecho Binyamin, after you Benjamin. Well, we know from book of Numbers where Moses was instructed to make trumpets which would be sounded with the shofar on certain occasions, and here these become the alarms that are warning the people of the imminence of the attack on the people would lead to their exile. And the word shofar also, as we see explicitly in Isaiah and in other portions of the prophets, the word shofar particularly alludes to the voice of the prophet raised, warning and chastising the people. Well, now, to understand Hosea, we have to uncover the allusions in these names and places and elusive words that do appear in his text, which have to do with the history of the 10 tribes and Judah as delineated in the book of Kings. And of course, probably at the time, the majority of the people did not have access to the manuscript of the book of Kings, which was recording their history, which would have remained in the hands of the prophets who composed it. And so the prophet here is alluding to nationally known sites and events. In the course of his chastisement, he's alluding to things that people knew, and presumably these prophecies were issued to the people in the form of some kind of broadsheets. Hosea, Maimonides tells us in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah, Rambam, Hosea was the head of the Sanhedrin, and as the Sanhedrin was watching the moral deterioration of the people, the Sanhedrin presumably would send these these sheets to the people to be declared in the synagogues and in the markets, and they would be given over again and again because the people were not listening. So this is the shofar that's being sounded in Giv'ah. and Ramah. So according to the Targum on our verse, on chapter 5, verse 8, the translation of our verse is Nevi'ai arimu kolachoin kad b'shofaro isnabu de yesen alehon amayo ketolin. You prophets, raise your voices like as a shofar of warning sounding the alarm. Isnabu, give prophecy. The Yesun alehon, that there is coming against them amamayo ketolin, people that are coming to kill. These are people that are murderers. And why? And here the Targum brings out the allusion of Givah and Ramah. Al da'amlichu yos Shaul demigiv'aso, on account of their crowning as king Saul, who came from Giv'ah, as we find in the early parts of the book of Samuel. Atzvachu kad b'chatzot tzarto, cry out, says the God to the prophets, cry out like a trumpet. Amor deyason aleyon malchin b'meshiryasahoin, say that there are coming against them kings with their armies, their encampments of armies. Al delo kabilu lepiskami Shmuel deme rameso, on account of their not receiving the words of Samuel the prophet, who came from Ramah, as we find in the beginning of Samuel. Besaru alehoin yabavus of de kerovo, announce against them the blasts of the alarm of those that make battle. Al de shakoru b'memory v'istacharu la'achoiro, on account of their betraying my word, says God, on account of their turning around, going backwards, mi bosar pulchani, from after my service. V'lo folchu kodamai b'makdusho liva'aro shivto Binyamin. They did not serve before me in the sanctuary that is in the land of the tribe of Benjamin. The temple was built in the territory of Benjamin. The altar was actually had to be in the territory of Benjamin, while the rest of the temple was in the territory of Judah. And so we see how Targum elaborates the allusions in these place names here, Giv'ah and Chatzot Ramah. Giv'ah alluding to Saul, Ramah, they didn't listen to Samuel. There was a base of in the house of iniquity, which is, as we've seen, Bet El, the place where the idols of Jeroboam were set up, and Benjamin was where they should have been going, to the temple. So we do find help from the Targum in elucidating the meaning of our verses. And now the prophet continues with his warnings. Verse 9, Ephraim leshamu seyeh b'yoim tocheho B'shiftei Yisrael hoidati nehemono. Ephraim will be destined for devastation on the day of rebuke. Among the tribes of Israel have I made this known most faithfully and certainly. Hosea was prophesying when this was just beginning, and it all came about as he did prophesy. And now turning again to Judah, verse 10, Hoyu sorei Yudo kemasigei gevul aleihem eshpoch kamayim evrosi. The leaders of Judah were also among those shifting the boundaries of a field, extending their own boundaries into the fields of their neighbors, a sin that is forbidden explicitly in the Torah for a person to encroach on their neighbor's land. And here the prophet is chastising the leaders of Judah for following in the ways of Ephraim and, as it were, encroaching on the behavior of the leaders of Ephraim against their own people, and that would lead to this terrible vengeance of God on Judah also. As we see in the later generations, particularly in the generation of Jeremiah, at the very end of the First Temple period, the great corruption that set in among the ruling classes of Judah. Verse 11, Oshuk Ephraim Ratzutz Mishpat Ki Ho'il Holach Acharei Tzov. Why is it, explains the prophet, Ashuk Ephraim, Ephraim is stripped bare, he's robbed. Retzutz Mishpat, he's broken down without justice, with no redress. The reason is Ki Ho'il, because he has been willing to go after the tzav, literally the instruction, the commandment, namely the commandment. He's gone after what the Torah specifically prescribes, which is the prohibition of idolatry and illicit gain. Targum here in our verse translates this word tzav as mamon dishkor, the blood, the money of treachery and falsehood, money gained through deceit. While the Rashi says that the connotation of tzav is that the people went after the dictates of the new dictates of the prophets of the Baal, and as such, the vengeance will come. Verse 12, Vahani cho'osh le'Ephraim v'chodachov leveis Yudo. And I am like a rot to Ephraim. The ash is a creature of decay that gnaws into the material and causes it to disintegrate. Rokov is indeed the decay that grows on abandoned items, decay in both Ephraim and in the house of Judah. Verse 13, Vayah Ephraim es cholyo, Vihudo es mezoiroi, Vayilech Ephraim el Ashur, Vayishlach el melech Yorehiv, Vehu lo yuchal lirapoi lochem, Ephraim has seen the effects of his illness, his sickness. Judah has seen his afflictions, his sores. And the response was not to return in repentance, but all of the different parties were going to the neighboring countries, to Assyria, to the north, and Aram, to the immediate north of Israel. They were intervening with intrigues with the kingdoms of Moab and Ammon to the east of Israel, and Edom further south, and particularly to Egypt. And we see that this was part of the overall illness of both parts of the people, this idea that they could be saved by strategic alliances with the other nations, which was not the way that God wanted for them. So they would, Ephraim was turning to Assyria, trying to engage Assyria against Judah. and sending to Melech Yarev, that is said to be an allusion to King Achaz, who, according to Rashi, Vayishlach el Melech Yorev, they're sent to a king, Yorev being the subject of the verse. Yorev refers, says Rashi, to King Achaz, who was a third of the kings named in whose reigns Hosea was prophesying, as brought at the very beginning of the prophecy of Hosea. Yorev, referring to Achaz, who turned himself into a challenger and a contestant against God by closing the prayer halls and the study halls in an attempt to take the people away from the tradition. And when Pekach ben Remaliahu, the king of the northern kingdom, joined forces with Ratzin, the king of Aram, as recounted in the early chapters of Isaiah, Achaz tried to bribe Tiglath-Pileser, who was the king of Assyria, the forebear of Sancheriv, to get those two, the northern kingdom and the Arameans, off his back. And this worked temporarily, but did not work permanently, because they could not cure the illness this way. And in the end, the Assyrians laid siege to Jerusalem in the time of Hezekiah, and did succeed in exiling the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. So all their strategies would not work because God is against them. He is now on the way to requite their sins. Verse 14, this very expressive verse. Ki anoichi chashachar le'Ephraim v'cha kfir leveis Yehudo ani etroif ve'ilech esovien matzil. The word shachal and the word kafir both refer to different kinds of lions, and God is like a lion that will attack. In the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 1, we see that the right-hand face of the chariot bears the face of the right-hand face of the angels on God's chariot is the face of the Aryeh, the lion, which is a symbol of chesed, of kindness, but this turns into the aggressive cruelty of these forms of lions that will attack and devour their prey. And we see in Isaiah and elsewhere that the attackers, particularly Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the Temple of Solomon, is called a lion. So the side of kindness turned into the side of severity, and this will attack both Ephraim and Judah. Ani calls God etrof. I shall tear the prey and go off. I'll carry off the prey. None can save them from me. Eleich oshuvo el makoimi ad asher yeshemu uvikshu fonoi. Batzar lohem yeshacharunani. I will go, says the Almighty, and return to my place, my abode, until they will come to the full consequences of their guilt. And then, uvikshu fonai, they will entreat my face. Batzar lohem yeshacharunani, when they're in a time of trouble and distress. In their distress, they will entreat and beg for my favor. And as I've mentioned, there is no break in the text of our Hebrew manuscripts at this point. However, the publishers of the Latin and the English Bibles chose to make a break here for reasons which become obvious when we look at the content of chapter 6, verse 2, and consider how its meaning was twisted by the Christian Bible people, but in the actual Hebrew text there is no break here. However, in order to fully discuss the meaning of the coming verses in chapter 6, verses 1 onwards, we shall make a break here and just note at this point that at the end of chapter 5, the prophet is depicting how when the people are in sore distress, they will entreat God, but the problem always is that they entreat God for a while, but once the distress is somewhat relieved, they fall away again. And this is the recurrent theme in Hosea, is the waywardness of Ephraim, but the absolute love of God for Ephraim behind the outer face of God's severe chastisement. So with that, my friends, let us now conclude this part of our studies for today, and I'll be back in just a few minutes with our going further into our study of the concept of the prohibition of the consumption of blood of animals and poultry, and we'll be looking at this both on the level of the halachah and on the level of chassidut in just a few minutes. Shalom, today the 23rd day of the month of Shevat of the year 5778, corresponding to the 8th of February of the year 2018. And today we will take a general look at the prohibition of the consumption of blood of animals and poultry, as it appears first of all in the text of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, where the prohibition of blood for consumption appears in a number of different places. The first place that the prohibition of blood appears in the Torah is in the book of Genesis in chapter 9, verse 4, where the Torah says, Ach basar benafshoi domoi loi soichelu. But meat, benafshoi, in its in its soul, domoi, its blood, loi soichelu, you shall not eat. This verse comes right after the dispensation to Noah and his children after they came out of the ark in the after the flood, the dispensation to eat the flesh of living creatures. And this prohibition, which mentions blood, is taken in a number of different ways. One of it is that if the flesh is still in its soul, that is to say, if there's still soul in the flesh because the animal has not yet died, then it's forbidden to take the limb of a living animal and consume that limb. And the seat of the soul is considered to be the blood itself, which carries the vitality around the body. And here is the first mention of the prohibition of consuming blood. Now, in the book of Leviticus, in the context of the Torah teachings about the sacrifices of animals and birds that were to be brought on the temple altar, we learn that the blood of the sacrificial animals is to be sprinkled upon the altar to attain atonement, and that the main fats of the sacrificial animals, namely the fats known as chelev, which is the choicest kind of fat, which was subsequently used by people for making tallow candles, and a suet for a grease and fat in their cooking. In the Torah, the chelev of the animals that are permitted to go on the altar, the cattle, the sheep, and the goats, which are the only animals, the only behemoth that are permitted for human consumption, their chelev, their fat, is forbidden for regular consumption. The chelev, the forbidden fat of the animal, may be used for making candles and for various kinds of labors, like treating of leathers and so on, but may not be consumed. And it's in Leviticus chapter 3, verse 17, that the Torah says, as an eternal statute for all of your generations in all of your dwelling places, all of the chelev, fat of the animal, and all blood shall you not eat. So here the prohibition of blood for consumption comes together with the prohibition of the chelev, fat, in one and the same verse, and bound up with the idea that it's because their proper place is only on the temple altar. And likewise we have in Leviticus chapter 7, still talking about the sacrifices, a repetition of the prohibition of blood, where the Torah says, V'chol dam lo seichelu, all blood shall you not eat. B'chol moishvoisechem, in all of your dwelling places, that is to say forever. La'oif v'labehemo, for a bird and for an animal. That is to say, we find no mention here of fish, and so the blood of fish, by inference we learn, is not forbidden. But poultry and animals' blood is forbidden for consumption, and the Torah warns Kol nefesh asher tuichal kol dam, every soul that shall eat all blood, v'nichreso anefesh ahi me'ameho, that soul should be cut off from her people. A very strict sanction. The sanction of karet, excision, which is mentioned here, is the most serious in the Torah. And as we shall see when we go into the study of the halachot of blood, there are different laws relating to the blood that comes forth with the act of shchita, the blood on which the soul depends. A different law for blood that is contained, for example, in the heart and other organs of the body, and yet another law for the blood that is absorbed in the meat if it shifts around in the meat of the animal through cooking. All of these are different gradations of prohibition that we shall be discussing, but we shall see that the most serious of the sanctions, which is for consuming the blood on which the soul comes forth from the body, that is the sanction of karet, excision. Well, now, again in the book of Leviticus, this time it's in chapter 17 in verses 10 through 12, the Torah says, Ve'ish ish mi beis Yisrael min hager agor b'seichom asher yoichal kol dam, any person from the house of Israel and from the dwellers that dwell amidst them, that is to say, the righteous converts that shall eat all blood, v'nosati ponai b'nefesh ha'oicheles es adon, I shall put my face against the soul that eats this blood, v'chrati oisa mekerev amo, I shall cut off that soul from being in the midst of her people. And the Torah here explains in these verses, Ki nefesh habosor badam, the soul of the meat, the soul of the flesh is in the blood. And that is because the animal's soul is in its blood, is dwelling in its blood. If humans consume the blood, the soul of the animal will get into the human spirit. The human will begin to behave like an animal. And that is not what God wants. God wants us to sacrifice our animality on the altar of His service. And thus the verse continues, V'ani nosati v'lochem al hamizbeach, I have given it to you upon the altar. The blood is to be poured on the altar, sprinkled on the altar, lechaper al nafshei sechem, in order to atone for your souls. Ki adam hu b'nefesh yechaper, the blood will atone for the soul. Here is the mystery of how it could be that the animal's blood on the altar should be able to atone for the human soul. And I'm not here to advocate animal sacrifices, although we are assured that at the end of days the daily temple sacrifice will return. But the essential spiritual idea of the altar, as we shall be seeing from the writings of Rabbi Nasson of Breslov, the essential meaning of the prohibition not to consume blood is that we have to give up our blood and our sweat and our fat on the altar of God's service, and it's not for us to be consuming the blood of animals, which will infuse us with an animal spirit. And the Torah continues there in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 12, Al kein omarti levnei Yisrael kol nefesh mikem lo seichal dam. Therefore have I said to the children of Israel, all souls of you shall not consume blood. V'hager hagor b'seichachem lo yochal dam, the stranger, the convert that dwells among you shall not eat blood. And once again we have in book of Deuteronomy chapter 12 verses 22 to 25, speaking now about the consumption of animals not in the context of temple sacrifices. There, the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 12 is speaking about eating the flesh of the deer and the gazelle, which are of the chayot, the non-domestic animals that are permitted for kosher consumption. that meat is not offered on the altar. Only the cattle, the sheep, and the goats are on the altar, but the deer and the gazelle and the other 7 kinds of kosher chayot are permitted for the consumption of their meat. And the verse says that when one will be eating the flesh of the deer and of the gazelle, the person that is ritually impure and the person that is pure together may eat it. That is to say, we are not talking about temple sacrifices that could only be consumed by those who are in a state of ritual purity, but where the meat is chulin meat that is permitted for regular consumption by people who are actually in a state of tum'ah. The Torah says, "Rak chazek levilti achol adam." Just be strong not to consume the blood. Ki hadam hu nefesh, for the blood is the soul. V'lo yisoichal nefesh im abosar, you shall not eat the soul with the flesh. Again, a reference to the prohibition of eating a limb from a living animal. So there in those places in the Torah we see the strictness of the prohibition of blood. And the whole concept of the salting of the meat, which is performed for Jewish kosher consumption, is all about making sure that our meat will not contain any kind of blood, any of the different bloods, which, as we shall be seeing, are defined by the halachah. Well, now, this series will be based upon the work known as the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abbreviated Shulchan Aruch, Al Hilchos Dam Tzliu Al Melicho, on the laws of roasting and salting of meat in order to render them free of blood for the purpose of kosher consumption. And on the azamra.org page, on which the live classes of the Avram's tent kollel are accessed, you'll find under the screen, if you scroll down among these study aids, a link to a PDF of the complete book which we will be studying, which is available for your download if you wish to study the Hebrew text. I will not be translating the Hebrew text word by word, but I will be working from the Hebrew text. And for the next part of today's discussion, I would like to just read the introduction to this work that was written by the late Rabbi Aaron Pfeiffer, who was the head of the yeshiva in the community of the Maharsha of Johannesburg, who very tragically was taken from us just a few years after the completion of this remarkable series, in which he, with very, very great clarity, delineates all of the halachot relating to these areas. And he begins by pointing up something that is very important to understand today, when the overwhelming majority of Jewish housewives, Jewish households across the developed world want to eat meat. They will be buying their meat ready packaged, ready processed from a kosher meat manufacturer. And the consumer will be very far from the actual slaughterhouse where the animals are slaughtered, and also very far from the processing factory where the carcasses of the animals are cut up and prepared for packaging and distribution to the stores, to the butchers, to the supermarkets. And so the average Jewish household will today, in our time, unless they have living somewhere close to where animals are being reared, will have very little understanding of what actually goes into the preparation of their nicely packaged, frozen portion of meat or poultry ready for cooking. It was not always this way. When I was a child back in the 1950s in London, I well remember that we would receive the slaughtered chickens from the butcher, but my mother had to actually salt the chicken portions, and she had to roast the liver in order to render them ready for eating. And you had to inquire from the butcher whether the meat was salted or not. And in fact, this could cause problems. There was a celebrated case of a young woman who had grown up in an Orthodox Jewish community in New York, United States of America, whose family had always been accustomed to buying their meat ready, prepared for cooking from the local meat supplier. And so when she got married and she moved to a town which had different arrangements, she was not aware that the butchers there were not salting the meat before providing it to the household. So this Orthodox Jewish young housewife was happily preparing her meat for her husband and family to consume without knowing that the meat was actually what we call treif. It was quite unkosher because it had never been salted after the slaughter to remove the blood. And so it's most important to understand what is the status of your meat. And here, in order to get into the subject deeply, we are studying halachot that most of the average households across the Jewish world in the developed countries will not have much practical use for, but anybody who does want to have an understanding of kashrut and to have an understanding of these Torah commandments and how they actually work will want to have knowledge of these areas. So, as Rabbi Pfeiffer, alav shalom, writes in his introduction, the Hakdama on page 15, in the earlier generations, the women used to salt the meat in their homes. And they were very expert in this because from their childhood, they were accustomed to do this. And in most cases, the rabbi of the town would publish a publication in the vernacular in which he would explain precisely the correct way to kasher the meat. And normally in these publications for the general public, the rabbis would actually rule more stringently wherever there was some disagreement among the halachic authorities, where some might rule more leniently and others more stringently. By and large, the rabbanim of the towns would tend to issue a more stringent ruling, and they would also try to get people to follow what are known as the hidurim, the beautifications of the mitzvah. In this case, to perform the salting and the kashering of the meat in the best possible way. Although there are situations when b'diavad, if it already occurred in the kitchen or in the place where you're kashering, you can rely on the more lenient opinion. Where possible, we try melechatchila to go for the more stringent opinion, which follows a higher standard of kashrut, and that is what lies behind the differences you see in kosher products, which are sometimes marked glatt kosher, which is supposed to indicate a more stringent level of observance in the different rules relating to the kashrut of the meat. The actual term glatt means smooth, and originally and specifically refers to the smoothness of the lungs of the animal, which are deemed to have no adhesions that might be morbid. And the concept of glatt initially means taking a more stringent opinion relating to the necessary checks of the lungs. But today, generically, the way that supermarkets and advertisers tend to distort terminology, the word glatt kosher has come to present to the public what is considered to be a higher standard of kashrut. Anyway, that was the situation back earlier, that the households were following the more stringent rulings of their local rabbi, and everybody knew how to do it from childhood. But he says, in our generation, there's practically nobody who actually performs the salting of the meat at home, because the salting of the meat takes place in the butcher's shops or in the plants where the meat is being processed, and very great quantities of meat are salted together. And it's this that has made it difficult in many places because of the great quantities of meat involved in the manufacturers. It's not possible to follow the more stringent rulings, which might entail a considerable loss on the part of the manufacturers, as we shall see in the course of this study. And since the very area of the laws of salting is actually quite a complex area of the halachah, what this means is that the majority of people have very little understanding of all of the different subjects involved in the laws of the salting of meat. And that may apply to the rinsing of the meat that is required before we start actually applying the salt. Likewise, how the salt is to be applied. Likewise, the rinsing that is to take place after the salting. And further than that, there is a very difficult issue with regard to all of this, because if meat has remained and not been salted to remove its blood within 3 days from the slaughter, then a different set of rules apply. Before it's possible to kosher that meat that has remained for 3 days, it has to be steeped in water for a time before the salting process will begin. Here we shall come later across these rules. There are also issues about whether these 3 days include if the meat was actually put into deep freeze after the animal was slaughtered before it gets portioned and salted. And these are very complex rules which we shall be encountering. Then continues Rabbi Pfeiffer in his introduction, when it comes to the roasting of the meat, there's practically nobody today who roasts meat without salting the meat previously. And sometimes, however, it's necessary to salt meat for somebody who's not able to roast meat in order to kosher it without applying salt, where, for example, a person has a particular medical condition where they may not consume salt, and where the doctors forbid meat that has been salted. It's a well-known thing that all of the kosher meat that one purchases has quite a heavy residue of salt from the salting process. Now, the only way to kosher meat and remove the blood without applying salt is if the meat is roasted over an open fire. And there's practically no work, he says, that explains and sets forth the laws clearly relating to this. And even in the case of the roasting of liver, which it used to be the case that every Jewish housewife who wanted to have her household eat liver would know how to roast the liver in her house, but there are many halachic questions that can arise, whether the liver has to be cut before it's roasted, and whether it can be roasted in an electric oven, and how long it needs to be roasted. And because of all of the great perplexity in all of these different laws, and the great difficulty in understanding how these laws apply in practice, as to be learned out from the Shulchan Aruch law code and its commentators, I have seen a great need to write this work, writes Rabbi Pfeiffer, both for the students of our yeshiva there in South Africa, and I have labored very much to clarify all of the actual halachic decisions, what applies b'diavad, if it's already happened, what lachatchila from the outset, a priori, what is lemahadrin, what is a hidur, a beautification and enhancement of the practice, and so on. And I've also included the various minhagim, the various customs that have some root and branch in the halachah, and I've written everything with the utmost terseness and brevity. And if it seems that sometimes I've gone on at greater length to explain the reason, this is because in that place it's impossible to be concise without people coming to some misunderstanding of the halakha. And I've tried as far as possible to write everything in a clear and pure language that will be readily comprehensible to everybody. And even though this work has been written for the students of our yeshiva, I've already written in my introduction to his first work on the laws of the prohibition of cooking meat and milk, or eating meat and milk together, the opinion of his own teachers and rabbis that he should publish these works for the benefit of the wider public. And this work contains all of his sources in elaborate footnotes, and but in the actual text, he has largely eliminated any references to anything which is not in a text that will be available to the students, except in certain places. And he thanks the one that gives strength to the weary, that even though he's been so busy with his studies with the students of the yeshiva and with the studies of the householders in his area, and with answering halachic questions day by day which arise in the process of his work, he's thankful to God who's given him the power to write this work. And we now can remember and make these studies Ilui Nishmas Rabbi Aaron Pfeiffer, alav shalom, for the elevation of his soul, for providing us with this very great introduction to these laws. And with that, I'd like to turn today to just begin looking at Likutei Halachot on Yeridea, the remarkable work of Rabbi Nosson of Breslov, covering the whole of Shulchan Aruch. And here we're going to be looking at some of his discourses in the Likutei Halachot on the second section of Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, where in the first volume are contained the laws of kashrut that we are studying now. And the laws of kashrut in Yeridea begin with shechita, with slaughter, which is an area that we are not going to be covering. This is a particularly technical area for those who have the desire to understand the laws, and particularly for those who are not put off by the idea of blood. After the laws of shechita in Shulchan Aruch comes another extremely complex session, the laws of terefot, all of the different conditions that may develop in the animal or the bird that would render the animal not fit for consumption. Terefot, all of the different maladies that could occur in the lungs, the throat, the gullet, the heart, the liver, and any of the limbs, broken bones. Will the animal be permitted for consumption with such condition or not? Very complex laws. And one might add in passing that it's no wonder that many of the great rabbis were also outstanding medical authorities, because anybody who has studied particularly the laws of Dreyfus, the laws of all of these morbid conditions, can see how the halachot actually go in great detail into many, many different aspects of animal anatomy and physiology, from which a wise person could begin to learn by inference to human physiology and functioning. And the rabbis who were the author of these collections of these laws were very great experts in the physiology of animals from practical experience. They were not merely sitting in their studies and reading books, but were actually there in the slaughterhouse being shown different cases of the lung of this sheep or the liver of this ox, and they'd have to understand and adjudicate in all of these cases. But we're now coming to the laws of blood and looking at the Likutei Halachot. On each of these subjects, the Likutei Halachot actually gives us a series of ma'amarim, a series of discourses that were written by Rabbi Nosson at different times of his life. His practice was to be continuously studying the Shulchan Aruch from beginning to end, from the beginning of Orach Chaim to the end of Orach Chaim, going straight on to Yerodea, all of Yerodea, going on to Even HaEzer on marriage and divorce, and going on to Choshen Mishpat on property and business matters, commercial matters, and between man and his fellow. And each time he would go through a subject, he would write one ma'amar, one chassidic discourse, taking as his starting point a teaching of Rabbi Nachman and using that as a springboard to go forward to the analysis of the laws of Shulchan Aruch in the light of the concept of chassidut. And each time that he went through the Shulchan Aruch, he would write a second and a third and a fourth ma'amar on the same subject. There are some subjects where we have as many as 7 ma'amarim, which were written at different periods of Reb Nosson's life, and there is a distinctly recognizable shift in the style of Reb Nosson as he develops and as he begins to expatiate at ever greater length and with ever greater eloquence over vast areas of the Torah. And so we do have in the laws of the Shulchan Aruch that are specifically for, in our day, the butcher to know how to remove from the animal carcass the forbidden chelev, the forbidden fat, and the forbidden dam, the blood, the forbidden blood vessels. We have a section of Shulchan Aruch that is specifically relating to the laws of chelev and dam, of the fat and the blood. And these two subjects are together, the fat and the blood, precisely because the chelev and the dam, the fat and the blood, were both offered in the temple altar. And says Rabbi Nosson, in relation to the prohibition of the chelev fat, that the main chelev fat that is forbidden is the fat that is over a place of the body called the kesalim, which we translate as the flanks, which is where the klayot, the kidneys, are. And the kidneys in Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought are associated with etzah, with counsel. They are considered to be the part of the body that puts counsel into the person. In English translations, the word, the reins of a person, R-E-I-N-S, refers to their kidneys, which in the words of King David in the Psalms and other sources is considered to allude to that part of the soul that corresponds to the what in the body is the physical kidneys, and in the soul is this part of the soul that sifts and purifies the thoughts in the mind and tries to determine what is a good idea, a good thought, and what is not a good idea. So there are, says Rabbi Nachman in the teaching on which Rabbi Nosson is basing his present Mamar Aleph, the first discourse on the laws of chelev and dam, Rabbi Nachman says that there are holy counsels that bring a person to serve the Almighty, and these are the 613 commandments of the Torah, which are all founded upon the purity of a person's observance of the divine covenant. Because the kidneys are what gives the soul and the person their ideas and their advice, and the kidneys are also the klei holada, the part of the body that is the vessel for procreation, we know that as the seed develops, it develops partially from the glands that are associated with the kidneys, and there, in the language of our sages, says that the kidneys receive the drop from the brain. In other words, the origins of the coming seed derive from the brain, but he says are cooked there in the kidneys. They develop in the kidneys. That is to say that it's in the kidneys that we receive the intelligence from the brain, and we give birth to the counsel that we will follow. And in the case of holy counsel, our counsels lead to the guarding of the covenant, and this is called the seed of truth. But corresponding to that is the counsel of the serpent, which is the very opposite of this. The serpent is the one that seduces Eve into sin, and the serpent is the source of all of the impure lusts of the human being, and the serpent injected its poison into Eve when Eve accepted the counsel of the serpent, and that, says Reb Nosson, that is the foundation of the prohibition of the chelev, fat, which is considered to be in the category of the violation of the covenant, because the chelev fat covers over the kidneys and it closes them up, and it prevents them from thinking thoughts of holiness. Here the idea would be that the fat of the prosperous person pulls them into materialism and covers over their spiritual nature. And this Rashi writes on Psalm 49, verse 14, where King David says, "This is the way of the wicked, that have a thick fat over their flanks, around their loins." This fat that they have prevents them from repentance to God, and that is why the wicked go in their wicked path, and they cannot produce holy counsel that will enable them to return to God on account of the thick fold of fat that covers over their kidneys. And as a result, all of their holy thoughts get mixed up, and as a result, they go in a bad way and follow the counsel of the serpent. And with this, we shall leave Reb Nosson here for today. But we begin to see how chassidus is going to give us the spiritual foundation that lies behind the outer body of the halachot that we shall be studying. So here we conclude our studies for today, my dear friends, and with the help of God, I shall be back next Sunday at 1600 hours Israel time for the continuation of our studies. And I would like to wish you Shabbat Shalom Umvorach, have a good and a blessed Shabbat. And this Shabbat we are already blessing the coming month of Adar, the month of Purim, when it is a mitzvah to multiply and expand our simcha. Let this be a joyous Shabbat, the Shabbat known as Shabbat Shkalim, when we recount the commandment to give the half shekel to the temple treasury for the sacrifices, thereby associating ourselves with the temple. Let this be a nourishing and a joyous Shabbat, and my blessings to you from the holy city of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Shabbat Shalom U'Mevorach.